Well, last time we met and we discussed the doctrine of God in very, very brief detail about the Trinity, about God's simplicity. So we are still on lesson 3, but we're moving on now to where it says the doctrine of angels. And I'm going to be very brief about the doctrine of angels, and I'm going to spend most of the time talking about that next doctrine there where it's underlined on that the back of the first page, which is the second page, the doctrine of humanity. So we're going to spend plenty of time talking about that, and then we'll finish, if there is time, talking about the doctrine of Christ. We do need to finish at 10:30, though. So, first, many theologians throughout history have given a doctrine of God, and they've talked about it. They've written about it. Augustine and Anselm, Thomas Aquinas, and others. And they also write about angels. Now, what we know about angels is quite limited. And oftentimes people talk about angels in some ways that I think aren't helpful, or they go into great detail about angels on and on for a very long time, and that can be unhelpful because we actually don't know much. What are angels in the Bible? The first thing I want to say is that they are created. Let's say that. We need to say that. Angels are not creators. There's only one creator. That's God. God created the angels. So God is the eternal creator. He has no beginning. He has no end. Angels have a beginning. And actually, you could even say it this way. Angels somewhat have an end, kind of like the devil and his angels, when they were thrown into the lake of fire, are also thrown in there with unbelievers, right? That's kind of an end, if you will. But they have a beginning. They're created things. So they don't, when you think about angels, we don't want to think about them saying, well, they're almost like God, because they're still creatures. So there's an infinite distance between the creator and the creature. No creature is like the creator as a creator, okay? In the sense that we don't create anything out of nothing. We don't have all power ending. We do have some power. We do like sub-creations. You know, we might make books like this one right here. We can kind of create. But that's not really creating, is it? That's kind of fashioning. We're not making something out of nothing. So there is a difference between creature and creator, even with angels. Now, I think one of the things that we can understand about angels is that they are servants. If you look at Hebrews chapter 1, verse 14, you can see he calls them ministering spirits or ministering angels. God sends angels to do things. And all throughout the Old Testament, you do see angels pop up in various places, and it looks like they're on some type of mission. They're on some type of errand, and that's exactly right. They've been sent to do something, to communicate a message, to help bring judgment onto a nation, punishment, or to help salvation come about for people. Angels are not, in the way humans are, created in the image of God. They're not the same. Yes?
It's Sunday school, so I can ask you a question.
Yes, absolutely.
I read a book one time. I've read several books on so-called near-death experiences.
Yes.
And in one book, with the topic of angels, this guy was, I'm trying to think of the term for the doctor that just deals with the aged. I can't remember, geriatric.
Yep.
And he dealt with cancer patients or people that were terminally ill.
Mm-hmm.
And he carefully surveyed his patients to see which ones had any kind of brain lesions and which ones didn't. And then he would ask them, because, you know, they were in hospice and they were like 1, 2, 3 days from passing away, and they knew it. He knew it, they knew it, everyone else knew it. And it was very interesting because oftentimes there were two things that all these patients had in common. They were mentally lucid, and you couldn't attribute anything they felt to the cancer. Is oftentimes they would say there were angels in the room with them,
Yeah.
and they would point to the corners of there's one here, one there, one here.
Yeah.
And they would often say that they know what you're thinking. And I thought that was
Yeah. So there seems to be evidences in the New Testament where there are, like Jesus says, don't reject one of these little ones because their angels are before my Father, or something like that. See the face of my Father, something like that. So there seems to be angels, whether we can see them or not, are at work, doing something, whatever God wants them to do. And when you get down to playing out all the details, I get to the point where I'm kind of like, well, I don't know how all that works, but because I can't see it, right? We can't study it like we can in a scientist, in a petri dish. We can only get it kind of from secondhand or third-hand information. The best information that we get is, what do we see the angels doing in the Bible? Is that concurrent with what people might experience? Then there may be something to it. But I do think that angels, people talk about guardian angels. They talk about angels that are there to take care of believers. I think there is some type of evidence of that in the New Testament. If you want me to explain what that looks like in detail, I couldn't do it. I'm limited. But they are ministering spirits. They're protection. They are. We often think the devil is kept at bay by angels for believers. Well, maybe to some degree, perhaps. What actually is keeping us protected as believers from Satan is the Holy Spirit within us, which is more powerful than an angel. We're not filled with an angel. We're filled with the Spirit of the living God, which is way more powerful. That is God in himself, So that's what gives us strength. But there is some kind of angelic presence that we can't see that I think goes on, and
Depending on what you just said, the way I look at it, the angels offered hope and comfort.
Yep.
When
Mm-hmm.
they're in their life here.
Yeah, that's right. Angels offer hope and comfort for those who are. I'm just saying that for the recording, for those who end their life here. Okay, there could be something to that for sure. Again, we're not in the mind and the eyes of the person dying, so we can't even see that. We can only hear them say what they say, So let me say a couple more things about angels, then I'm going to move on. Because again, this is a survey kind of. This isn't. We could look at the Old Testament passages of where angels show up. They often show up as warriors, as very frightening things. We think of battles that are about to take place, and the Lord pulls back the eyes of, I think, maybe of Elisha or Elijah, and he says, "Look here, I have an army. Lord of hosts of they're going to fight, on your behalf," and so on and so forth. But we're not going to be able to jump into that. I will say that the devil is or was an angel. He was originally, or at the start, if you will, good, or it looked good. He was. Satan literally means accuser. Lucifer would be his name. Lucifer literally means shining one. It actually comes from the Latin lux, Lucas, one who is a shining thing. And so the devil is a fake angel of light, a shining angel of light. So very beautiful. So then there's the nature of temptation for you right there, contained in who he is. So he tempts you with himself, but he's fake. It's a fake light. It's not the original light. He's not the light of the world. But nonetheless, his shiningness is derivative from God because God gave it to him. And so he tempts humanity. C.S. Lewis has got some really interesting things about Satan, about how he was originally good, but then he fell, and so forth. So Satan and his angels are called the demons, right? And they will ultimately be cast into a lake of fire and have judgment on them for all eternity. They are the wayward servants. They didn't continue to serve God. They left their position and then followed Satan, and they'll be judged for that. So I guess it's important to kind of say this about angels before I get to the doctrine of humanity. I see reality as like a two-tiered thing. We have a spiritual realm and then we have a physical realm, and both of these things are happening now. Now, we can't see the spiritual, we don't walk in the spiritual, but it's there. So, for instance, the best example of this, I think, is in reference to the temple. Remember, in the Old Testament, we saw a physical temple. Solomon's temple was a physical temple. But God told Moses, be sure that you make everything according to the pattern shown to you on the mountain. So God is showing to Moses, he pulls back the veil, if you will, and says, look here at this spiritual realm. Here's what the temple looks like in the spiritual reality. Make it in the physical world according to that pattern. So there's an overlay. Here's a pattern, make it according to that pattern. Angels inhabit that spiritual reality, and men generally inhabit this physical reality. This is where we are in this space-time continuum. So, last thing I'll say too is this. Heaven, I think also where angels are, or you might even say earth is where angels are, but it's still a created place. Heaven is even created. The one thing that's not created is God. He created everything else. Even the heavenlies are created. So that's something that's just really exciting to think about and hard to wrap your mind around. Okay, I'm pushing pause there on the doctrine of angels. I need to spend some more time talking about humanity. So we've talked about God, we've talked about angels, humans. What are humans? Humans obviously also are creations. But we are called something very specific. We are said to be made in the image of God. The human race was created by God. We have Adam and Eve. And we were made after the image of God. We were like God. But how were we like God if we're not creators? So I'll make some comments about that. Well, first, I'll tell you how I think people have said it in the past, and I think we need to adjust it. So I have St. Augustine here, and he asked that question, how is humanity like God? What makes us in the image of God? So if I were to say, well, we got Eden right here on the front row, and she's made in the image of God, what makes her in the image of God? And not, the pretty little cat out there, why is that not in the image of God? Because it's not. Humans are. Augustine would say, that's a great question, and this is what he would say. Man is rightly understood, or is believed to be in the image of God, and his nearness to God is above him, is found in that part of him which is superior to other parts of nature. And then he goes on, he says, the mind of man, the natural seat of his reason and understanding, is weakened by long-standing faults which darken it. Now what he's trying to say is this. The thing that makes man in the image of God is your rationality, your mind. Like you could look at a cat out there and it's, it has some measure of intelligence, doesn't it? It can communicate with meows and so on and so forth. You can look at bees, for instance. Bees communicate in the way that they fly to other bees when they find honey and everything. But if you look at the mind of man, it's clear no other animals are writing music theory, right? They're not doing deep calculus and manipulating the world and changing the world and literally now trying to affect the weather, with their new inventions and things like that. So they say, well, your rationality is what makes you the image of God. And they also link that with your mind and your soul. So if I were to say soul, mind, rationality, those things would be linked. And they would say, what makes you in the image of God is your eternal soul. And other animals don't have that. I would like to say that's not a great way of saying it. That's not a great way of saying it. I know I'm disagreeing with Augustine, and I'm disagreeing with a lot of other people as well. This is a long-standing accepted thing that what makes us in the image of God is our rationality. But I don't think that's enough. I don't think that's enough because for several very, very deep reasons. For one, I think that all of what we are makes us in the image of God, including our physical bodies, including our relationship that we have with our spouses. He made man and woman after the image of God. And your rationality and my rationality may be different, actually. Certain people, even with, mental issues, where their rationality is less than normal because they've been either affected by something or they were born this way. To use the word imbeciles, their rationality is less because they have a mental condition. I wouldn't call them less human, but that would kind of be the implication. If your rationality is the thing that makes you image of God and their rationality is much lower than the rest, then what does that mean then? Does that mean that they're less human? Well, of course not. Fully human. God created humanity and he told him to do something. And I think that really tells you what it means to be in the image of God. What did he tell humanity to do? He said, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. Right? Remember that? Now, we looked at that in great detail several weeks ago, but it's very important. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. We as creatures made in the image of God rule. That's one of the things that makes us in the image of God. God is king. God rules over everything, right? And he's given us a place, namely creation, and he says, subdue it. Rule over it, right? Now, how does rationality play with that, into that? Well, our rationality allows us to rule well. Does that make sense? Think of Solomon. What did Solomon pray for? He said, give me what? Wisdom. So that I can do what? So that I can rule well as a king. Wisdom was a tool so that he could be a good king. As humans, we were created as little kings and queens. We're not the king. Who is that? That's God. We know that. We're not the king, but we're little kings and queens. And our functionality is to rule over creation. Now, what did we do? We sinned, and we can't subdue everything because we've sinned. We brought sin into the equation, and our rationality is weakened. We can't rule properly. But he did tell us originally, when he made us, rule and fill. Rule and fill. Rule and fill. So that if we did that, it would be the image of God filling all of creation, just like he did with the temple in the Old Testament. When he made the temple, he filled it with his image. When Solomon made the temple, the glory of God did what? It descended and filled the temple. That's exactly what happened in the Old Testament. That picture of making a temple and filling it with glory, making a temple and filling it with glory, that was what he intended with us as humans, to make creation, which is like a temple, and fill it with his image, with his glorious image. That's what makes us image of God, image bearers, is we have, yes, rationality. We do have a soul. That's all part of it. But we have a physical body that fills a physical temple. And that physicalness is part of the image of God too. When God raises us from the dead, he doesn't just raise souls, he raises bodies. Because that's what's part of us being in the image of God. And this is the last thing I'll say about this, because I do think it's extremely important, and I'll tie it into marriage. But we've been charged to fill. Fill. That's part of being in the image of God too. God fills things with his glory. When he creates a space, he fills it with his glory. Fills it with his glory. And that's what makes us as part of, as image of God, as image bearers. We fill a temple. We fill a creation. This is really, 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 really important because if we reduce the image of God to simply our minds or our rationality, then we could probably say, well, our bodies aren't really that important. And then that could lead us into some very bad things, very bad sins. In fact, in the early church, they struggled with this teaching that our bodies weren't really as important as our souls. And so what were they doing with their bodies? They were doing some really sinful things with their bodies, things I don't want to say right now out loud. And that doctrine that your body isn't as important as your soul is very wrong. In fact, you can trace it back to Thomas Aquinas. I read someone in an article that critiqued him, saying our bodies in glory are nothing but more like glorified hood ornaments. But that's not right. Our bodies are more than that. We are we are part of our bodies. God will redeem the body. He will raise the body. Jesus' body was raised. It was a physical body. Even though it was glorified, it was still physical. So everything that we are as humans, our bodies, our minds, our souls, and what we do, we are fruitful, we are multiply, we fill the earth, we subdue it. That's all part of being image bearers as little kings and queens. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's any kind of questions on that. If there's not, then I'm going to move on and talk about marriage. Nope.
No questions. I think of the body this way, that it's interesting that, recently the scientists said that the egg is fertilized, that there's a sperm.
Yeah.
Just in recent, the last 2 or 3 years, they noticed this spark of energy
Yes.
that starts life, kind of, sort of.
Yeah.
That portion of life. But at the same time, when somebody passes away of natural causes, that body is laying there, all the components that make that
Yeah.
biological machine run are still there, but the life is gone.
Right. They're no longer there. So their soul, then you will, goes to be with the Lord. Yep. And then to be absent from the body, as Paul says in Philippians, is to be present with the Lord. So there's a sense in which we're absent from the body. But then we're awaiting our resurrection bodies. Now, what a day that will be. We don't know what that will look like. That will be something quite powerful. But yeah, you're right. Both of those things of body and soul. In fact, our soul is with Christ. Even when we die, we still await that body experience with the new creation, and how that's going to look is going to be quite amazing. So there's a lot more we could say to that, but again, we're at the basic level. I will say that I do think, like right now in seminary, the image of God's among seminarians getting a lot of attention. A lot of people are talking about it, and I think it's a good thing, because there's a lot of talk in the culture about what does it mean to be human. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be, how do we understand that in terms of image of God? And it's important things to lean into. Which brings me to marriage. What is marriage? Well, God made marriage. It is between a man and a woman. One man and one woman. It has a purpose. Now, theologically, the purpose was this, so that they can make the family bigger. And then those people can make their own families, and then those families can make their own families until the entire earth is filled with families that are made in the image of God. That was the goal. And I'll say this, I would think that marriage would cease and reproduction of new families would cease when the whole creation was filled with families that were in the image of God. That was the original intent. This is one of the reasons, I think, why Jesus says, when he's questioned by the Pharisees, when a man dies and then his wife has to marry his brother, and then he dies and has to marry his brother, and keep on the family line. When they get to heaven, who's husband? Or who's the husband, who's the wife? And he essentially says, no, you're misunderstanding it. At that point, marriage is no longer in effect. They're like angels in heaven. They're not given in marriage to the left or to the right. They're not given in marriage. Why? Because in glory, the creation will be filled with the image of God. The temple will be full. And once it's full, you can't fill it anymore. Okay? So that was the goal. Marriage was given as an institution that helped fill a temple with the glory of God. Okay? Now, it is between one man and one woman. This has to be affirmed. We recently changed our bylaws to affirm these things, so that if someone wants to come and get married at this church and they are claiming to be a man and they're really a woman, or vice versa, or whatever, it's not allowed. We only recognize one biological man, one biological woman being married, not one man being married to two women, or vice versa. That's not the original intent, and so we try to stay to that. And then marriage is also a picture. It's a picture of Christ and the church. The man represents Christ. He's not Christ. but he represents Christ. He's a picture of Jesus, in the way he loves his wife, and the wife responds to his love in the way she submits to her husband. It's just a picture of Christ and church. Every marriage is. Now, I even think unbelievers as well. It's still a picture. I just think they don't picture it well. Maybe some do a little better than others. I certainly know a lot of unbelievers, and they're married, and they've been married their entire lives, very happy and love each other, right? But whether you do good at it or not do good at it, it's still a picture. That's the original intention for the institution, is to fill the earth with the image of God. And then we see Christ's love for his church depicted in marriage. And we also see Jesus on a mission right now to do what? To fill the world with the image of God by making converts. So with marriage, we need to insist on this, what the role is for the husband. The husband is the leader of the family, but he does so by loving leadership, by understanding leadership. He lives with his wife in an understanding way. The wife also responds, and she is to picture the church in the way she submits and follows his leadership. Very unattractive and not fun things to talk about in our culture today, that the husband is the leader. But that, just because you say, well, the husband's not the leader, or you want to challenge that, doesn't change anything, because it's God's design. This is how God designed it. The man leads, the wife is the helpmeet, and yet there's no competition there. There's no mixing, you might say, of roles. There's no oppression. I think that's a very wrong way to go, is say, well, you're saying that the husband's the leader of the family. Well, sure, but that doesn't mean he's oppressing anyone or that anyone's lesser than another person. You just have different roles. But it also means that if decisions are made that don't actually benefit the family very well, the buck stops with the husband and he has to take responsibility. So it's actually his fault, you know what I mean? So it's quite a bit of responsibility. Adam and Eve, if you watch when they sin, it actually says this, in the Old Testament, right? And when they took and they ate, it says she took and she ate and she gave some to her husband who was with her. And the question is why didn't Adam say something? Why didn't he stop her from taking the fruit? He should have stepped in and said, no, we don't need to do that. That's not what God wanted. But he did not. You might say he abdicated his role of leadership. He should have, when he saw his woman talking with this serpent, he should have said, you need to get out of this area right now. You need to get out of this garden and take that serpent and either exile him from the garden or kill him or something. But you don't belong here, and you're speaking against God's word. But you don't see Adam do that. You don't see him stand in and say, you need to stop. He's kind of going with it. And instead of leading, he's actually submitting to the serpent by submitting. There's a friend of mine, I think maybe he cited Carl Trueman with this, but I loved the way he did this. But God spoke first to man and to Adam, and then we have Eve following Adam, and then we have the serpent. And what actually happens is that's switched upside down. The serpent speaks, the woman listens, Adam listens, and God's the one disobeyed. And that's what the serpent does. He tries to turn it upside down. I think that's exactly right. We're submitting to the wrong ruler now when we listen to the serpent. We're not submitting to God. Proper male leadership then submits to the word of God and leads his family in that as well. Okay, much more could be said, but I'll stop there, and next time we'll talk about the doctrine of Christ. Are there any comments or questions, because it is past 10:30?
I may have said this once before, but I'm not a Stephen King fan. However,
Yeah.
having said that, I did see a movie one time, some television called Hateful Things.
I never heard it.
Ever heard of it? And what's interesting about it is the devil comes to town in the form of a polite, genteel old man.
Mm-hmm.
And he asks people for favors, but he knows what everybody wants, their deepest desire. For example, this kid wants a Mickey Mantle baseball card. And he's got the shop, and it appears to be empty, but he can come up with anything. He hands the kid this perfect 1956 Mickey Mantle baseball card, absolute mint condition.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like a fun show, actually.
Well, children, because there's one scene in there that children shouldn't.
Yeah, yeah,
It's just too violent.
because it's Stephen King.
But other than that, as from an adult perspective, it's really an interesting way to look at the little ways that the devil works.
Mm-hmm.
That seem to be totally disparate, totally disconnected, but they're all there.
Right. Yeah, it's chaos. He's an agent of chaos. So, you have a question? God. He asked, who made heaven? In himself. Where was God before he made heaven? I said God was in himself. Well, you're asking a really great question. But you're applying something to God that can't apply, namely space. Space is a created thing. So is time. And space and time, God had to create. So where was God and when was God before there was space and time? You can't answer that because you can only answer with the things that you have as a creature, namely space and time. Well, yep. God's not created. He's the only uncreated one. All right, we'll talk more about that one later. Let's go ahead, and you are dismissed so that we can go ahead and get started.